I started talking about verse 106 in the previous video, so it might be worth listening to that video before listening to this one. Verse 106 is about the 10 Bhumis, although we actually have 11 here. And I'm going to be referring to the article in Wikipedia on the Bhumis in Buddhism. I'll put the link to it in the notes section below. So if you don't know what a Bhumi is, look at the article or listen to the previous video. So I'll read out verse 106 again and then go straight into the article in Wikipedia. Verse 106. The first 7 stages are still of the mind, but here the 8th is imageless. The 2 stages, the 9th and the 10th, have still something to rest themselves on. The highest stage that is left belongs to me. Now this article doesn't cover the highest stage, so I might have to leave that until the next video. So the 10 Bhumis are covered in the Attavamsaka Sutra, and they're regarded as a very advanced part of the Bodhisattva path. The article in Wikipedia says that the Bhumis are an extremely advanced part of the Buddhist path. For example, in Huayan Buddhism, there are some 40 previous stages before the first Bhumi, and these are listed in the article. But like I said previously, if you take this as a prescriptive outline of what you must do, then you might as well give up now, because it takes eons of practice. And this is why many Buddhists don't bother about enlightenment. You just try and get on with a bit of meditation and being a good person. But that's missing the point altogether, although there's nothing wrong with that in itself. The problem though is taking this in a prescriptive way. Instead, I suggest taking it in a celebratory way, because that's what the description of the Bhumis seem to me. They're a celebration of enlightenment practice. And that's what I hope to point out in this video. So let's look at the first 7 stages, which are still of the mind. The very first Bhumi is the very joyous, and this is attained with the first direct perception of emptiness. So the first Bhumi is called the very joyous. It's attained with the first direct perception of emptiness. So this is your initial enlightenment event. This is the beginning of the path. The path begins with enlightenment. It does not end in enlightenment. It begins with enlightenment. The Buddha didn't begin his enlightenment when he sat down to meditate under the Bodhi tree. What he did when he sat down was he remembered his first enlightenment event, which is what happened when he was a teenage boy, sitting under a rose apple tree, watching his father ploughing in the field. That was the starting point. He remembered it. And that's what he consolidated on the evening of his enlightenment, his full enlightenment. So this is the first stage. It's joyous. It's very joyous. So this is the first part of spiritual practice, remembering. Just even conceptually remembering enlightenment, remembering that this is what we want to direct ourselves towards. So this is very much part of the mind, as it said in verse 106. The second Bhumi is the stainless, and this is to do with overcoming all tendencies towards engagement in negative actions. Now, I'm actually going to be paraphrasing this article quite a bit, because The Bhumis are much more thorough than I'm going to be making out here. So for example, it says here that the Bodhisattvas on the second level perfect ethics and overcome all tendencies towards engagement in negative actions. Their control becomes so complete that even in dreams they have no immoral thoughts. Well, when you're practicing, this has to be the case. When you're practicing, when you're directing yourself to the here and now, to the heart of your sense of being, then there can be no negative thoughts. There can be no negative thoughts. There can be nothing that's going to be distracting you from your practice. Okay, maybe at other times. When you're not practicing, that will happen, but when you're practicing, you're coming into realization once again. So in this sense, this is stainless. The third Bhumi is the luminous. The article here tells us that Tsongkhapa states that the third Bhumi is called the luminous because when it is attained, the fire of wisdom, burning all the fuel of objects of knowledge, arises along with a light which by nature is able to extinguish all elaborations of duality during equipoise. So in spiritual practice, what's happening is by practicing, you're burning up the tendencies to subscribe to the reality of conventional belief, conventional understanding. You develop equanimity, and the article goes on to explain the extent of this equanimity. But we're just looking at the seeds of this in our own practice. We have the seeds of all the Bhumis in our own practice. And with practice, these will become more consolidated. So in the third Bhumi, again, it's still concerned with the mind because it involves the undermining of all these tendencies to become wrapped up in dualistic thinking. The fourth Bhumi is known as the radiant. So what's the difference between luminous and radiant? I think luminous is like a quiet light, but radiance is giving it out. And here it's described as emitting the radiance of exalted wisdom. There are deeply rooted afflictions which are being destroyed. So this is just a deepening of the previous one, but it's still concerned with the obstructions that the mind throws up. The fifth Bhumi is known as difficult to cultivate. It's not plain sailing, is it? There are times it is very difficult. There are times you think you're doing very well, and then you'll hit something in yourself which is very deep and disturbing. So we've had all this light and radiance, and now we hit the difficult to cultivate. One of the drawbacks of having a regular practice is you can become on automatic. You might have a regular meditation practice. You sit down for 40 minutes or an hour each day. You get into a nice, tranquil, blissed out state. And then you get on with your regular daily routines. Where's the challenge? Where's the challenge? When you've got a routine, when you've got a routine of spiritual practice, where is the challenge? If the challenge isn't going to come from within, then you put yourself into a challenging situation and see how you cope. Because you have to be ripped apart at some point. There can be no complacency here. But at this stage we're reaching a point where we've seen the power and efficacy of our enlightenment practice. It's no longer about faith, it's about certainty. There's always been an element of this, but it comes and goes. At this point, though, we know. And again, this is still, as verse 106 says, of the mind. The sixth Bhumi is the manifest. According to the Wikipedia article, the sixth level is called the manifest because the Bodhisattva clearly perceives the workings of dependent arising and directly understands signlessness. Signlessness refers to the fact that phenomena seem to possess their apparent qualities by way of their own nature. But when one examines the appearance, one realizes that all qualities are merely mentally imputed and not a part of the nature of the objects they appear to characterize. So this is something that we've looked at before. This is understanding the nature of the world that has no intrinsic substance. This is anatta or anatman. Realizing this, we no longer invest in it. And as we're no longer investing it, we're more inclined to practice. All notions of I and other are transcended, along with conceptions of existence and non-existence. These sixth level bodhisattvas abide in contemplation of suchness with minds that are undisturbed by false ideas. And a lot of the previous verses have been concerned with this very thing, so we should be well established in this now. Again, this is still the mind. We're still working with the mind and its understanding of the nature of the world and of existence. The seventh Bhumi, the gone afar. Bodhisattvas on the seventh level develop the ability to contemplate signlessness uninterruptedly and enter into advanced meditative absorptions for extended periods of time, thus passing beyond both the mundane and supramundane paths of the Shravakas and the Prajika Buddhas. These are two of the vehicles. Again, as far as what we've been looking at already, we've gone beyond this. We've gone afar. We just have to keep going afar. So once we've given up on the conventional beliefs, realized the insubstantial nature of the so-called physical world, realized its impermanence, and that it contains no satisfaction, there's no possibility of spiritual fulfillment in it, we move on to the eighth Bhumi, the immovable, which here in verse 106 is described as the imageless. And we reached the imageless back in video 18, verse 17. The article quotes Nagarjuna. The eighth is the immovable, the youthful stage. Through non-conceptuality he is immovable, and the spheres of his body, speech and mind's activities are inconceivable. They're inconceivable because they're beyond concepts. In the imageless, we've gone beyond form. Our attention is no longer being distracted by forms. We are immersed in our practice, immersed in realization. Our sense of being is vibrant. There is no self here, no world here, no thoughts. This is the imageless suchness. Now the remaining two bhumis, the two stages, the ninth and the 10th, they still have something to rest themselves on, because we're coming back to the mind again. The ninth Bhumi is the good intelligence. We're told in the article that progress towards awakening is now quick. Well, because you're consolidated. Here you understand the texts. You understand what they're getting at. You understand and realise where they're pointing to. So the ninth Bhumi is understood in terms of mastery of teaching the doctrine in all aspects. So the ninth Bhumi is about being able to express the teachings. The 10th Bhumi is the cloud of doctrine. This stage is actually also described in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And this is very much about spreading the doctrine once again. You're raining the Dharma on all beings. But verse 106 is still something that you can stop on. It's still something that you can rest. So these are the 10 Bhumis. I've gone over them in a very brief and cursory way. The Wikipedia article goes into them in more detail, but if you really want the full flavour of them, then look for them in the Avatamsaka Sutra. They're about just over the halfway mark in the Avatamsaka Sutra, about page 700 or something like that. So if we're enlightenment practitioners, we've already got the seed of these Bhumis. But we needn't worry about it. The essential understanding here is to take these as a celebration of our ordinary enlightenment practice. They're addressing enlightenment practice in the way it should be addressed, as this glorious, exquisite, celestial adventure. It's the most extraordinary text. There's nothing like it, because there's nothing like enlightenment practice. There's nothing more wonderful than this. But even so, if you still got this feeling that it's a tough hill to climb, let's come back to verse 106. Because there's one more stage which isn't covered in the Avatamsaka Sutra, but it's covered here in the verse summary of the Lankavatara Sutra. The highest stage that is left belongs to me. And this is the stage that we're really interested in. And what stage is this? Verse 107 tells us, self-realization and absolute purity. This stage is my own. It is the highest station of Maheshvara, the Akanishta heaven shining brilliantly. So the highest stage is self-realization and absolute purity. And this isn't absolute purity of the mind. The mind cannot be absolutely pure. It's the absolute purity of self-realization. Because when you practice, you're abiding in absolute purity. And it's described here as the highest station of Maheshvara in the Akanishta heaven. The Akanishta heaven means the highest heaven. There's nothing above it. It's shining brilliantly. And Maheshvara, funnily enough, is the Hindu god Shiva, which might be a bit of a shock for some people. But if you've looked into my videos on the Yoga Vasishta, it should be no surprise, because Shiva is the absolute. Maheshvara is actually ignominiously replaced in later developments in Buddhism by the primordial Buddha Virochana. But we're not going to get involved in that. If you're a Buddhist, you might have a problem with Maheshvara. But if you're an enlightenment practitioner, there's no problem whatsoever. Whether it's Maheshvara or Virochana. But this is the perfect description of enlightenment practice. You're dwelling in the highest heaven with direct access to the Absolute.